The first thing anyone noticed wasn't the explosion. It was the fact that Riley Hart didn't react to it. While everyone else in the field hospital hit the ground or reached for a weapon, she stayed exactly where she was, hands steady inside a patient's chest like the chaos around her didn't exist, finishing the procedure before she even looked up. Senior Chief Garrick Stone had spent 6 months calling her nothing more than hired help, and now he was staring at her from the floor, trying to understand why the only person not panicking was the one he trusted the least. Then Reed stepped in, tossed her an M4, and she caught it like it belonged to her. Checked it. Ready in seconds. No hesitation, no questions. That was the moment everything shifted. Before we go any further, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end. If this story moves you, please hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. Outpost Kestrel sat in a stretch of land that looked empty until it wasn't, a place where quiet never meant safe and every structure felt temporary, like it had been dropped there in a hurry and could disappear just as fast. And the field hospital was no exception, except for one detail that set it apart from everything else on base. It was the only place that looked like someone actually cared. 6 beds lined the main room, each spaced with just enough clearance for movement under pressure, a cramped surgical suite walled off in the back, and a triage station up front that doubled as Riley Hart's workspace. But what made it different wasn't the layout, it was the precision behind it. Supplies were always stocked before they ran low, instruments laid out in exact order, surfaces clean in a way that didn't happen by accident. Riley moved through it all without wasted motion, stepping around obstacles before they existed, reaching for tools before they were asked for, her awareness stretching across the room like she could track every detail at once without ever looking rushed. Most people didn't notice. Stone did. He just read it wrong. Senior Chief Garrick Stone had made up his mind about her the first week she arrived, and nothing she did after that changed it. Not the speed of her work, not the way patients stabilized under her care, not even the fact that his operators stopped complaining once they realized they were in better hands than they'd expected. To him, she was still a civilian contractor in blue scrubs, a placeholder until someone better came along. "You run a clean shop," he said once, standing just inside the doorway, his tone flat like he was commenting on equipment instead of a person. Riley didn't look up from the chart she was updating. "Clean keeps people alive." Stone watched her a second longer than necessary, like he was waiting for something else, then gave a short nod and turned away, already done with the conversation. That was as close as he ever got to approval. He tried twice to have her reassigned, pushing it up the chain with the same reasoning both times, that his team needed military medical support, not civilian hires who hadn't been tested in combat conditions, and both times the request came back denied without explanation. He didn't like not getting answers. He liked Riley even less because of it. Across the room, Evan Cole nearly dropped a tray of instruments before catching it at the last second, the metal clatter echoing just loud enough to draw attention, and Riley was already there before anyone else reacted, steadying the tray with one hand and meeting his eyes with calm focus. "Slow down," she said quietly. "Nothing here is moving faster than you can handle." Evan nodded a little too quickly, nerves written all over him in ways he couldn't hide yet, his uniform still carrying that newness that hadn't been worn down by time or experience. "Yes, ma'am." Riley adjusted the placement of the instruments, subtle corrections that made the setup cleaner, more efficient. "You don't need to rush. You need to be precise." He swallowed, then nodded again, this time slower. "Precise." She gave a small, almost invisible nod in return, then stepped away, leaving him to reset without hovering, trusting him just enough to figure it out. No one paid attention to that exchange. Except Reed. Staff Sergeant Lucas Reed leaned against the far wall, arms loose at his sides, watching the room with a quiet awareness that didn't miss much. And when his eyes tracked Riley, there was no dismissal there, no assumption, just a kind of professional acknowledgement that never turned into questions. He didn't treat her like furniture. He treated her like someone who belonged exactly where she was. On the far bed, Thompson shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at the bandages along his side, shrapnel wounds still healing slower than he liked, and Riley was beside him before he could call out, checking the dressing with practiced hands. "You keep testing it like that, it's going to hurt every time," she said, her tone even, not unkind. Thompson gave a faint grin. "Just making sure you're still paying attention." She adjusted the bandage, firm but careful. "I don't miss things." He studied her for a second, something thoughtful passing behind his expression, then nodded once like he believed her more than he let on. Most of them did, even if they didn't say it out loud. They relied on her the same way they relied on the equipment around them, without thinking about it too much, without questioning where it came from or what it could really do under pressure. That was fine with Riley. It was easier that way. The radio started picking up more chatter as the night settled in, nothing unusual at first, just overlapping reports and routine check-ins, but the tone shifted gradually, tightening in a way that didn't match the usual background noise of the outpost. Riley heard it before anyone said anything about it. She was already moving toward the surgical suite, checking supplies, adjusting position, preparing for something no one had officially called yet, her hands working through the motions like they'd done it 100 times before. Evan noticed. "We expecting incoming?" "Always," she said, not looking up. He hesitated. "No, I mean tonight feels different," she finished for him, finally meeting his eyes. He nodded. Riley held his gaze for a second, then gave a small, steadying breath. "Then we prepare like it is." Outside, a distant crack of gunfire echoed across the base, sharper than the usual harassment fire, followed by another, closer this time, and the radios shifted from background noise to focused urgency in a matter of seconds. Stone's voice cut through it, controlled but tighter than before, issuing orders, redirecting teams, locking down sectors. He stepped into the medical building moments later, already geared up, scanning the room like he was committing every detail to memory. "If anyone comes through that door you don't recognize," he said, looking directly at Riley now, "you stay back and you hide." The words hung there for a second, heavy with assumption. Riley met his gaze without any visible reaction. "Understood." Stone held her eyes just long enough to make sure the point landed, then turned and moved out, already focused on the fight building outside. Evan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Hide." Riley didn't respond. She was already moving again, repositioning a cart slightly, adjusting the angle of a bed, small changes that didn't look like much unless you knew what you were looking at. The gunfire outside intensified, no longer scattered but sustained, layered with shouted commands and the sharp crack of return fire, and somewhere beyond the walls, something heavier joined in, a deeper impact that carried through the ground itself. Evan looked toward the door, then back at Riley. "This isn't normal." "No," she said quietly. For a moment, everything seemed to hold, like the base was taking a breath it wouldn't get to finish. Then the first explosion hit. The entire building shuddered, dust spilling from the ceiling, lights flickering hard enough to throw shadows across the walls, and somewhere outside, alarms started screaming over the sound of gunfire. Evan froze. Riley didn't. She turned toward the door, her expression calm in a way that didn't match the situation, listening to the pattern of noise outside like it was telling her something specific. And in that moment, if you were paying close enough attention, you would have realized something was off long before the first enemy ever reached the building. Because Riley Hart wasn't reacting to the chaos. She was already ahead of it. You think you know who she is right now, but you don't. And the next few minutes are going to prove it in a way no one in that building is ready for. The second explosion didn't feel like an accident. It landed with intent, closer than the first, shaking dust loose in thicker sheets, and snapping something in the rhythm of the bass that Riley had already been tracking before anyone said it out loud. This wasn't harassment fire. It was coordinated, layered the way trained hands built pressure before a breach. Mortars to disorient, small arms to fix attention, then movement where no one expected it. Her body recognized the pattern, before her mind needed to explain it. She was already counting. Angles, entry points, time between impacts. 12 years of training didn't disappear just because she wore blue scrubs instead of a uniform. For a second, the room in front of her blurred into another place entirely, another structure under fire where the air smelled the same, and the noise folded into itself, until it became something almost predictable. And she remembered the first time she realized she could move through that kind of chaos without feeling anything at all. That had been the moment that scared her. Not the bullets, not the explosions. The absence of hesitation. The way decisions came clean and fast, stripped of everything that made them human. That was when she started building a way out. Night classes between deployments, online coursework in quiet hours, a nursing degree earned piece by piece over 6 years while the rest of her life stayed classified. Then Mass General in Boston, where no one asked questions as long as she did the work. And finally this contract in Afghanistan. One last step that was supposed to put distance between who she had been and who she wanted to become. It hadn't worked. She still mapped every room the moment she entered it. Still tracked exits without thinking. Still heard patterns in chaos that other people missed. And now those patterns were getting louder. Riley, Evan's voice cracked just enough to break through the noise. She turned to him. He was standing exactly where he'd been when the first blast hit, hands half raised, eyes locked on the door like it might open any second. He was frozen. Not from weakness, from overload. She stepped in front of him, forcing his focus onto her. "Look at me." He did barely. "Breathe in," she said, steady, controlled. "Slow, then out." He followed, uneven at first, then finding the rhythm because she didn't let him look away. "Good," she said. "Now listen carefully, we're going to move." Outside, gunfire surged again, sharper, closer, and over the radio someone shouted about a secondary breach forming on the east side of the compound. Riley didn't look toward the sound. She already knew what it meant. "They're not just hitting the perimeter," she said, her voice low enough that it cut through the noise instead of competing with it. "They're probing for weak points." Evan swallowed. "This building." "Yes." The word landed clean, no hesitation. She moved then, fast but controlled, pulling a supply cart into a new position, angling it slightly off-center from the door, creating a narrow funnel that would force anyone entering to commit to a line of movement. Evan watched her, confusion mixing with fear. "What are you doing?" "Making it harder for them to move," she said, already shifting a second piece of equipment to cover a blind angle, "and easier for us to see them when they try." He stared at the setup, then back at her. "Us." Riley met his eyes for half a second. "You're not freezing again." Another burst of gunfire rattled closer, followed by shouting that was no longer distant. They were inside the wire. Evan's breathing picked up again, but this time he didn't lock up. "Where do you want me?" She pointed. "There, stay low, don't shoot unless you have to. If you do, aim center mass and don't overthink it." His hands trembled, but he nodded and moved. That was all she needed. The door slammed open. Reed stepped in, rifle up, scanning fast, his presence filling the room with a different kind of energy, controlled and direct. And when his eyes landed on Riley, they didn't widen or question. They assessed. "Multiple contacts moving this way," he said. "You ready to move patients?" "They're not getting that far," she replied. It wasn't bravado. It was a statement. Reed studied her for a fraction of a second, then reached back and pulled his spare M4 free, tossing it toward her in one smooth motion. "Then don't let them." The rifle hit her hands, and everything else fell away. For a heartbeat, she felt it settle there, weight familiar, balance exact, like something she had set down years ago without ever really letting it go. There was grief in that recognition. And relief. She checked the chamber, quick and precise, then brought it up, her stance shifting without thought, body aligning into something she hadn't allowed herself to be in a long time. Evan saw it happen. So did Reed. Neither of them said a word. The first insurgent came through the doorway seconds later, fast and low, weapon already coming up, and Riley moved before he finished the motion. Controlled bursts that dropped him where he stood, the sound of her rifle cutting clean through the chaos. A second figure followed, trying to pivot around the first, and she adjusted without hesitation. 2 shots, center mass, the body folding into the narrow space she had created. The funnel worked. They had nowhere else to go. Evan fired once from his position, the shot wide but close enough to force a third attacker back, buying them a second that Riley used to shift angles again, covering the opening. "Good," she said, not looking at him. "Stay with me." Her voice was different now. Not louder, not harsher. Just certain in a way that left no room for doubt. Over the radio, Stone's voice cut in, sharp with confusion. "Who is reporting from medical?" Riley keyed the mic without lowering her weapon. "Medical is holding. 3 contacts down, expecting more." There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to feel it. "That's not possible," Stone said. Riley didn't answer. Another shadow moved at the edge of the doorway, faster this time, and she shifted again, already ahead of it, already where she needed to be before the fight caught up. Because she wasn't becoming something new in that moment. She was stepping back into something that had never really left. You've seen her fight now, but you still don't know who she really is, and the next moment is where everything stops being deniable. The firefight didn't explode into chaos. It tightened. Every movement inside the field hospital narrowed into lanes Riley had already shaped, the doorway turning into a choke point, the angles forcing anyone who pushed through to commit before they understood the mistake. And she held that space with controlled precision, each shot deliberate, each adjustment made before the threat fully formed. Evan stayed where she put him, breathing hard but moving when she told him to, his earlier hesitation replaced with something steadier, not confidence yet but trust, and that was enough. "Left side," she said, already shifting. He fired this time without freezing, the round striking close enough to stagger the next insurgent into Riley's line, where she finished it without breaking rhythm. The room smelled like cordite and antiseptic, sharp and wrong together, and somewhere behind them a patient groaned, the reminder cutting through everything that this wasn't just a fight. It was a place full of people who couldn't move, couldn't defend themselves. Riley adjusted her position slightly, placing herself between the doorway and the beds without thinking about it. That part of her had never needed permission. Another burst of gunfire cracked from outside, closer than before, followed by a voice shouting in a language Evan didn't understand but Riley did, just enough to recognize urgency, command, coordination. "They're pushing numbers," she said into the radio, secondary elements still inbound. Silence answered her for half a second. Then Stone again, sharper now. "Who is this?" She ignored the question. "Medical is secure for now," she continued, "but not for long if they breach in force." Reed moved up beside her then, his team filtering in behind him, fast and efficient, taking in the scene in a single sweep, bodies at the entrance, equipment repositioned into defensive structure, Riley standing in the center of it with her rifle up and her posture locked into something that didn't belong to a civilian. He didn't ask for an explanation. He just nodded once and folded his team into the positions she'd already created. The next push came harder. 2 insurgents hit the doorway at once, one high, one low, trying to break the funnel with speed instead of caution, and for a fraction of a second the space compressed into overlapping motion, too fast for hesitation, too close for error. Riley fired first, dropping the one on the left, then pivoted into Reed's line as he engaged the second, their movements crossing without collision, clean and practiced even though they had never worked together before. That was when the grenade came through the window. It shattered glass on impact, bounced once across the floor, and rolled toward the center of the room, small and almost ordinary in the middle of everything else. Evan saw it and froze. Thompson, still on the bed, shouted something that didn't fully form. Riley moved. No pause, no calculation anyone else could see. She stepped forward, scooped it up in one motion, and turned with the same fluidity, throwing it back through the broken window before the thought had time to catch up. The explosion hit outside a heartbeat later, close enough to rattle the walls again, far enough that the room stayed intact. For a second, no one spoke. Evan stared at her like he was trying to reconcile two different realities at once. Thompson let out a slow breath, disbelief written across his face. Reed didn't react at all, because now he knew exactly what he was looking at. Footsteps thundered outside, heavier this time, organized, and Stone pushed through the doorway moments later with the rest of his team, weapon up, eyes sharp, already expecting resistance. What he wasn't expecting was the scene in front of him. The bodies, the defensive layout. And Riley. She stood just off-center in the room, rifle steady, scrubs marked with blood that wasn't entirely hers, her breathing controlled like she'd been doing this all night, instead of stepping into it minutes ago. Stone's expression shifted, not all at once but in pieces, confusion first, then recognition of something he couldn't quite place, and finally a tightness in his jaw that looked a lot like everything he hadn't said for 6 months catching up to him at once. "What the hell?" Later, Reed cut in, already moving past him. "We're not done." The fight outside began to taper, the sound of gunfire spreading outward as the remaining insurgents were pushed back, and inside the hospital, the shift was immediate. Riley lowered her rifle, and in the same motion, she set it aside. "Evan," she said, already moving toward the nearest patient, "tourniquet check, now." He snapped into action without hesitation. Reed's team adjusted positions, covering entrances, securing the perimeter, but their attention kept drifting back to her, to the way she transitioned from one role to another without pause, like there had never been a line between them to begin with. "Stone," she said, not looking up, "I need pressure here." He stepped forward automatically, hands moving where she directed, pressing down against a wound he hadn't even noticed yet, his focus narrowing as training took over. For a moment the two of them worked side by side, no rank, no assumptions, just function. Then he looked at her. Really looked this time. "You're a surgeon," he said quietly. Riley didn't glance up, no. Her hands moved with precise control, steady even now. "I'm a nurse." "That's not what I'm asking." The words hung there, heavier than anything that had been said before. Before she could answer, Commander May Carroll stepped into the room, her presence cutting through the remaining noise without effort, her eyes taking in everything at once, the damage, the bodies, the positioning, and finally settling on Stone. She didn't ask him what happened. She read it on his face. "Report," she said. Reed gave it clean and direct. Medical held the breach point. 4 enemy combatants neutralized inside. Defensive positions established prior to contact. No patient loss. 1 grenade returned before detonation. Carroll's gaze shifted to Riley. "Is that accurate?" Riley met her eyes for the first time since the fight ended. "Yes, ma'am." "And your role in that report?" "Contract medical support," she replied evenly. Carroll held her gaze a second longer than necessary. "That's not what I'm asking." Across the room, Stone exhaled slowly, like something inside him had finally settled into place whether he liked it or not. "I tried to have you removed. he said, his voice low, not defensive, just factual. Riley nodded once. I know. Neither of them looked away, because now they both understood what that meant. Carol turned slightly, already pulling up something on her tablet, her expression sharpening as she accessed a file that hadn't been part of Riley's contract documentation. Something deeper, something buried. The room didn't go quiet, but it felt like it did, because whatever she was about to read was going to change everything that came next. You've seen what she can do, but you haven't seen the truth on paper yet, and once that file opens, there's no going back to who they thought she was. Commander Carol didn't speak right away. The glow from her tablet lit the sharp lines of her expression as she scrolled, eyes moving steadily across a record that had never been meant for casual review. And the longer she read, the quieter the room seemed to become, like even the aftermath of the firefight understood it wasn't the center of attention anymore. Stone watched her, not impatient, not defensive, just waiting in a way that told you he already knew enough to understand the rest wouldn't be simple. Reed stood off to the side, arms loose, gaze steady, the only one who didn't look surprised by any of it. Riley didn't move at all. Her hands were clean now, her posture neutral, the rifle gone from her grip like it had never been there, but nothing about her looked smaller for it. Carol finally lowered the tablet. 2 deployments, she said, her voice even. Marine Corps Special Operations. No reaction from Riley. Bronze Star with Valor. Still nothing. Carol stepped closer, studying her in a way that wasn't about rank or paperwork anymore. Operations listed here that don't officially exist. A pause. Then the question that actually mattered. Are you a risk to this command? The room held still around it. Riley met her eyes without hesitation. No, ma'am. That's not the full answer. Riley's jaw shifted slightly, not tension, not resistance, just the weight of choosing words she hadn't said out loud in a long time. I left because I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, she said, her voice steady but quieter now. Someone who made lethal decisions without feeling anything about them. No one interrupted. I thought if I changed roles, changed environments, I could redirect that. She exhaled slowly. Save lives instead of taking them. Carol watched her carefully, and did it work? Riley didn't answer right away. Then, honest and simple, not the way I planned. A faint shift in Carol's expression, not disappointment, not judgment, just understanding settling into place. Stone stepped forward then, the movement deliberate, like he'd been standing on the edge of it for a while. I owe you an apology, he said. It wasn't polished. Didn't sound rehearsed. I made calls to get you pulled out of here, he continued, his voice rougher than before. Twice. Thought I was protecting my team. Riley held his gaze. I know. He nodded once, accepting that she'd known all along. I was wrong. No qualifiers, no excuses. Just the truth sitting there between them. Riley let a second pass, then gave a small nod. We're past it. Not forgiveness. Not dismissal. Just forward movement. Stone exhaled quietly, like that mattered more than anything else she could have said. The way you moved last night, he added, not looking away, the way you fought, whoever trained you did a hell of a job. A faint, almost invisible shift in Riley's expression, even when I wish they hadn't. That landed heavier than anything else in the room. Carol straightened slightly, decision already forming. Your contract is being amended, she said. Medical duties remain primary. Tactical integration becomes secondary. Riley's focus snapped back to her. Ma'am. No more hiding behind a title that doesn't fit, Carol cut in, calm but firm. Not from me, not from your team, not from yourself. A beat. That's in order. Riley held her gaze, something unreadable passing behind her eyes. not fear exactly, but the recognition of a line she'd been avoiding being drawn in front of her. "Yes, ma'am." Across the room, Thompson shifted slightly on his bed, wincing as he adjusted. "We treated you like furniture for 3 months," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "And you just kept saving us anyway." No one laughed. Because it wasn't a joke. It settled into the space between them, uncomfortable and honest, and for once, no one tried to smooth it over. Hours later, the base had quieted into that strange stillness that comes after violence, where everything looks the same but nothing feels like it did before. And inside the medical building, the lights hummed softly over a space that had been put back together piece by piece. Evan sat on a supply crate, watching Riley as she restocked a tray with the same careful precision she always had, like routine was something you could rebuild if you focused hard enough. "You okay?" he asked finally. It wasn't about the fight. They both knew that. Riley paused for a second, then looked at him, really looked this time. "I think so," she said. Honest, not certain, but real in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in a long time. Evan nodded slowly, like that was enough. She went back to her work, hands steady, movements familiar, but something had shifted not in what she was capable of, but in what she was willing to accept about it. She wasn't one thing or the other. Never had been. And maybe she didn't need to be. Maybe the question had never been about leaving one behind. Just choosing what to do with both. So tell me which moment hit you the hardest, the grenade, the reveal, or the apology. If this one stayed with you, make sure you like and subscribe, because the next story goes even deeper into the kind of past you can't outrun.